My name is Gabrielle Thompson, and I am 28 years old. Standing outside the pristine white colonial house that once held my childhood nightmares, I clutch $1 million check in my trembling hand. 12 years ago, I was thrown out of this same front door like discarded trash, my disability making me worthless in my family's eyes. Today, I return as a billionaire tech mogul, but the scars on my heart run deeper than any success can heal. The mahogany door opens, and my brother Brandon's face goes pale with recognition and shock. Before I take you through this journey of pain, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, I would love to know where in the world you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and do not forget to hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell because stories like mine prove that sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest wounds. Now, let me tell you how a family's cruelty became my greatest motivation. The Thompson family was everything Riverside Hills society admired from the outside. My father, Robert Thompson, commanded respect as the city's most successful corporate lawyer, while my mother, Dr. Margaret Thompson, saved lives as the hospital's chief cardiac surgeon. Their golden boy, Brandon, possessed everything parents dream of in a son. At 6 feet 2 inches with striking blue eyes and an athletic build that made girls swoon, he excelled in academics, sports, and social connections. From the moment he could walk, Brandon was destined for greatness in my parents' eyes. Then there was me, born 3 years later with a twisted left foot that required multiple surgeries and left me with a permanent limp. While Brandon received standing ovations at every school play and sporting event, I struggled to keep up with my peers both physically and socially. My parents never said it directly, but their actions spoke volumes about how they viewed their imperfect daughter. Family photos displayed prominently throughout our mansion featured Brandon's achievements, while my art projects and academic awards were relegated to the refrigerator or forgotten entirely. Every family dinner became a celebration of Brandon's latest accomplishment while my attempts to share my day were met with polite but distant nods. When Brandon scored the winning touchdown, the entire family would go out for an elaborate celebration at the country club. When I won the regional science fair for designing an adaptive technology prototype, my mother simply said "That's nice, dear," before returning to discuss Brandon's acceptance into Harvard's pre-law program. The cruelest part was not the neglect, but Brandon's systematic campaign to ensure I never forgot my place in the family hierarchy. He would accidentally knock over my carefully constructed science projects the night before competitions, claiming he was just playing around. When friends came over, he would introduce me as the family charity case or make jokes about my limp that left everyone laughing except me. My parents, when they witnessed these incidents, would simply chuckle and say Brandon's just being a typical big brother without ever considering how their dismissal encouraged his behavior. The physical differences between us became more pronounced as we grew older. Brandon developed into the kind of young man who drew admiring glances wherever he went, while I remained small for my age with mousy brown hair and the thick glasses that helped correct my nearsightedness. Our parents would beam with pride when introducing their handsome, successful son to friends and colleagues, while I felt like an afterthought trailing behind the family's real stars. As I struggled through my teenage years, the isolation within my own home became suffocating. Brandon received his own car at 16, while I was told that my disability made driving too dangerous. He got a generous allowance for his social activities, while I had to ask permission for lunch money. The message was clear: Brandon was worth investing in, while I was simply a burden to be managed until I could become someone else's responsibility. Brandon's 16th birthday party was planned like a royal coronation. My mother spent months organizing what she called the social event of the season for Riverside Hills elite teenagers. The backyard was transformed into an elegant outdoor ballroom with string lights, a professional catering service, and a DJ who had performed at celebrity events. Local politicians, business leaders, and their families were invited to witness the Thompson family's crown jewel celebrate another year of perfection. For weeks leading up to the party, I had saved every dollar from my part-time job tutoring younger students to buy a dress that might help me fit in for once. The navy blue dress with delicate silver beading was the most beautiful thing I had ever owned, and for the first time in years, I felt almost pretty when I looked in the mirror. I had practiced walking in low heels to minimize my limp and had even convinced my mother's hairstylist to give me an elegant updo during her lunch break. The party was in full swing when I finally gathered the courage to venture outside. Brandon, devastatingly handsome in his tailored suit, was holding court near the pool with his prep school friends and their dates. Several of his teammates from the lacrosse team were already drinking from red plastic cups, their voices growing louder and more boisterous as the evening progressed. I found a quiet corner where I could observe the festivities without drawing too much attention to myself. Everything changed when Brandon's girlfriend, Ashley, accidentally bumped into me while carrying drinks. The collision caused me to stumble slightly, and my limp became more pronounced as I tried to regain my balance. The group of popular kids around Brandon began to snicker, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Instead of helping me or defending me as any decent brother would do, Brandon saw an opportunity to entertain his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon announced loudly enough for half the party to hear, "may I present my sister Gabrielle, living proof that not all Thompson children are blessed with beauty or grace." The laughter that followed felt like daggers piercing my chest, but he was not finished. With alcohol fueling his cruelty and an audience hanging on his every word, Brandon delivered the blow that would echo in my nightmares for years to come. "You're an ugly, disabled fool, and honestly, I don't know why my parents keep pretending you're actually part of this family." The party fell silent for a moment before nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I looked desperately toward my parents, who had witnessed the entire exchange from their position near the buffet table. Instead of rushing to comfort me or reprimand Brandon for his vicious words, my father simply shook his head with disappointment while my mother's face showed nothing but cold embarrassment. Dr. Margaret Thompson, who had dedicated her life to healing others, looked at her own daughter with the same disdain she might reserve for a particularly unpleasant medical condition. "Brandon's right," my mother said quietly, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You've always been an embarrassment to this family, Gabrielle. Perhaps it's time we stopped pretending otherwise." My father nodded in agreement, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in courtrooms. "We've given you every opportunity to overcome your limitations and make something of yourself, but you've consistently disappointed us. Maybe it would be best for everyone if you found somewhere else to live." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My own parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were publicly disowning me in front of the entire social circle that defined their lives. The beautiful dress that had made me feel special suddenly felt like a costume I had no right to wear. Through tears that blurred my vision, I stumbled back into the house and up to my room, where I threw my few precious belongings into an old backpack. As I prepared to leave the only home I had ever known, I could hear the party resuming outside. Brandon's laughter carried through the window as my parents no doubt explained to their guests that they were finally free from the burden of their defective daughter. The rain that began falling as I stepped out the front door seemed like the perfect accompaniment to the end of my childhood and the beginning of a journey I was completely unprepared to take. The Hamilton Youth Shelter was not the kind of place anyone would choose to call home, but for a newly homeless 16-year-old girl with nowhere else to turn, it became my salvation. The building was old and crowded, with peeling paint on the walls and the constant smell of industrial disinfectant failing to mask the underlying odors of too many people living in too small a space. My room was barely larger than a closet, containing a single bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto the alley where delivery trucks unloaded supplies for the neighboring restaurant. During my first few weeks at the shelter, I struggled to adapt to the harsh realities of life without family support. The other residents were mostly older teenagers who had aged out of the foster care system or young adults who had fallen through society's cracks. Many regarded me with suspicion, assuming that someone who spoke with proper grammar and wore clean clothes must be slumming it temporarily before returning to a comfortable life. They had no idea that my pristine appearance was carefully maintained to hide the shame of my rejection, or that I lay awake each night wondering if my parents ever thought about the daughter they had discarded so easily. My salvation came in the unexpected form of Samuel Martinez, the night security guard who worked the graveyard shift at the warehouse complex where the shelter's residents often found temporary employment. Samuel was in his 50s, with graying hair and kind brown eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had experienced both great success and devastating failure. During our first conversation over coffee in the warehouse break room, he shared his story of losing a multi-million-dollar tech startup to embezzlement by his business partner, followed by his wife's departure when the money ran out. Despite his own hardships, Samuel recognized something in me that even my own parents had failed to see. When I mentioned my interest in computers and technology, his eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone rediscovering a long-lost passion. He began staying after his shifts to teach me programming languages he had mastered during his entrepreneurial days. In the empty warehouse office, surrounded by outdated computers and fluorescent lighting, I learned to write code that could bring my ideas to life. Samuel became the father figure I had never truly had, encouraging my dreams instead of focusing on my limitations. When I designed my first simple application to help visually impaired users navigate websites more easily, he was the one who celebrated my achievement with genuine pride. Unlike my biological parents, who had always made me feel like my disability made me less capable, Samuel helped me understand that my unique perspective could actually be an advantage in creating technology that served underrepresented communities. The peace of my new life was shattered one afternoon when Brandon appeared at the warehouse loading dock, flanked by two of his prep school friends who looked like they were on a particularly unpleasant slumming expedition. Word had apparently reached my parents about where I was living, and they had sent their golden boy to assess the situation. Brandon's designer clothes and expensive cologne seemed obscenely out of place among the industrial surroundings as he surveyed the loading bay with barely concealed disgust. "So this is where the family disappointment ended up," Brandon announced loudly enough for all the warehouse workers to hear. "Loading boxes like the common laborer you were always destined to become." His friends laughed on cue as he continued his performance for their entertainment. "I have to admit, Gabrielle, this environment suits you much better than our house ever did. At least here, nobody expects you to be anything more than you are." Samuel, who had been checking inventory nearby, stepped forward to intervene. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed Brandon's behavior. "I think you've said enough, son. This is a workplace, not a playground for your entertainment." Brandon's eyes narrowed as he sized up the older man who dared to challenge him. "And who exactly are you to tell me what I can say to my own sister? Some washed-up security guard who couldn't make it in the real world?" The confrontation escalated quickly as Brandon threatened Samuel's job and made it clear that the Thompson family's influence extended far enough to cause real problems for anyone who crossed them. Watching this decent man who had shown me nothing but kindness being threatened because of his association with me, I realized that my family's cruelty would follow me wherever I went unless I found a way to become strong enough to stand up to them. That night, as I worked on improving my coding skills in the dim light of the warehouse office, I made a promise to myself that would drive every decision I made for the next decade. I would not just survive the rejection and abuse my family had inflicted on me, I would use their cruelty as fuel to become successful enough that they could never hurt me or anyone I cared about ever again. By 19, I had developed what I believed was a revolutionary mobile application designed to help people with mobility challenges navigate public spaces more efficiently. The app used crowdsourced data to identify wheelchair-accessible routes, locate nearby accessible restrooms, and even provide real-time updates about elevator outages or construction barriers. Working 16-hour days while maintaining my part-time job at an electronics repair shop, I had poured every ounce of creativity and technical skill into creating something that could genuinely improve lives while also establishing my independence from the family that had rejected me. The breakthrough I had been hoping for came when Diana Walsh approached me at a technology meetup for young entrepreneurs. Diana was everything I was not. Tall, blonde, effortlessly stylish, and possessed of the kind of natural confidence that came from never having her worth questioned. She claimed to be a marketing consultant who specialized in helping innovative startups reach their target audiences. Her enthusiasm for my project seemed genuine, and for the first time since leaving my family home, I felt like someone truly understood the potential of what I was creating. Diana quickly became not just a business partner but the closest friend I had ever experienced. She would arrive at my tiny studio apartment with expensive takeout from restaurants I could never afford, listening intently as I explained the technical challenges I was facing and offering insights that seemed to come from extensive experience in the business world. When I expressed doubts about my ability to compete with established tech companies, she would remind me that many of the most successful entrepreneurs had started with nothing but determination and a good idea. Under Diana's guidance, I began preparing for what she assured me would be a life-changing presentation to potential investors. She helped me craft a business plan, design professional-looking marketing materials, and practice my pitch until I could deliver it flawlessly despite my nervousness about public speaking. The night before the presentation, she took me shopping for an outfit that would help me project the image of a serious entrepreneur rather than a struggling young woman working out of a cramped apartment. Everything fell apart the morning of the presentation when I discovered that my laptop had been hacked and my application's source code had been completely wiped from my system. Worse yet, when I called the investment firm to confirm the meeting time, I was told that no such presentation had ever been scheduled. The receptionist's confused tone as she explained that they had never heard of Diana Walsh or my company sent a chill down my spine that turned to ice when I realized the full scope of what had happened. Within hours of my devastating discovery, local tech blogs began reporting on an exciting new accessibility app being launched by Meridian Solutions, a well-established company owned by Brandon Thompson and his Harvard roommate. The screenshots and feature descriptions were identical to my work, down to the specific algorithms I had developed to optimize route calculations for wheelchair users. My months of painstaking development had been stolen and repackaged by the brother who had spent years telling me I would never amount to anything. When I confronted Diana at her upscale apartment, the mask of friendship finally slipped to reveal the calculating opportunist underneath. She explained matter-of-factly that my parents had hired her 6 months earlier to monitor my activities and report back on any potential threats to their family's reputation. My technological success, she informed me with cold professionalism, was exactly the kind of embarrassment they wanted to prevent. Brandon's theft of my work served dual purposes. It eliminated me as a potential competitor while adding another impressive achievement to his already stellar resume. The legal battle that followed was a masterclass in how money and connections could corrupt even the justice system. My father, leveraging his decades of experience and extensive network within the legal community, filed a preemptive lawsuit claiming that I had stolen proprietary technology developed by Brandon during his computer science studies at Harvard. Despite my possession of months of development documentation and version history that clearly proved my ownership of the code, Robert Thompson's influence and resources overwhelmed my court-appointed legal aid attorney. Samuel, who had been my strongest supporter and character witness, suddenly found himself under investigation for allegedly providing me with stolen warehouse equipment to develop my application. The charges were obviously fabricated, but they were enough to cost him his security job and make him unemployable in any position requiring a clean background check. Watching this good man suffer because of his association with me was almost more painful than losing my life's work to Brandon's theft. The final blow came when the court ruled that not only had I failed to prove my ownership of the disputed technology, but I was also liable for court costs and damages to Meridian Solutions for my malicious claims against their legitimate business practices. The settlement wiped out my savings and left me thousands of dollars in debt, while Brandon's stolen version of my app went on to generate millions in revenue and earn him recognition as one of the region's most promising young entrepreneurs. As I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by legal documents that formalized my defeat, I realized that my family's capacity for cruelty extended far beyond simple rejection or public humiliation. They were willing to destroy not just my dreams but the lives of anyone who supported me, using their wealth and influence to ensure that I would never pose any threat to their carefully constructed image of perfection. The move to Portland represented my attempt to escape the suffocating influence of my family's reputation and start fresh where the Thompson name held no power. At 21, I found myself in a studio apartment barely larger than the warehouse office where Samuel had taught me to code, furnished with items salvaged from thrift stores and Craigslist. My neighbors were mostly students and struggling artists who minded their own business, creating an anonymity I had never experienced in Riverside Hills where everyone knew my family's story. Fixtech Electronics was the kind of small business that survived on razor-thin margins and the desperation of customers whose devices had died at the worst possible moment. The owner, Carl Brennan, was a bitter man in his 50s who saw his repair shop as a stepping stone to wealth that had never materialized. He hired me for barely above minimum wage, knowing that my lack of references and legal troubles made me desperate enough to accept his exploitative terms and hostile work environment. Carl delighted in reminding me daily that I was lucky he had been willing to take a chance on someone with my questionable background. He would assign me the most tedious and physically demanding tasks, knowing that my disability made certain jobs more difficult and painful. When customers complained about repair times or costs, he would blame my incompetence loud enough for everyone in the shop to hear, using my struggles as entertainment for his more favored employees. The nightmare of my past caught up with me on a particularly busy Tuesday when Dr. Margaret Thompson walked into Fixtech Electronics wearing the kind of expensive outfit that immediately marked her as someone accustomed to better surroundings. She approached the counter where I was processing customer orders with the clinical detachment she had always shown toward me, her voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate compliance with her demands. "I think it's time we discussed your future, Gabrielle," she said without any preamble or acknowledgement of the years that had passed since our last conversation. "Your father and I have been monitoring your situation, and we believe we can offer you a solution that benefits everyone involved." The proposal she outlined was dressed up as compassion, but the terms made her true intentions clear. If I agreed to permanently abandon any involvement in technology or entrepreneurship, they would pay off my legal debts and provide a modest monthly allowance that would allow me to live quietly without causing them any further embarrassment. My refusal to accept their offer triggered a cold fury that transformed my mother's professional facade into something genuinely frightening. She explained in the same tone she might use to discuss a terminal diagnosis that my continued presence in any field related to technology would result in systematic destruction of every opportunity one tried to create. The Thompson family's influence, she reminded me, extended far beyond Riverside Hills, reaching into universities, corporations, and government agencies throughout the region. True to her word, the retaliation began within days of our confrontation. Anonymous complaints about my work performance reached Carl's attention, followed by visits from customers who seemed unusually interested in spreading rumors about my mental stability and reliability. My landlord received calls questioning my ability to pay rent, while potential employers began declining my applications before even conducting interviews. The systematic campaign of sabotage was subtle but devastating, designed to ensure that I remained trapped in my current circumstances without any path toward improvement. Brandon's harassment took a more personal and immediate form. He would appear at my apartment building at random hours, usually accompanied by friends who treated these visits like entertainment expeditions to observe the family failure in her natural habitat. They would make enough noise to disturb neighbors and create the impression that I was associated with troublemakers, gradually eroding my standing in the building and making my already precarious living situation even more unstable. The psychological warfare was perhaps most damaging because it forced me to question my own perceptions and sanity. When potential employers mentioned hearing concerning reports about my background, I could never be certain whether the information came from my family's influence or legitimate professional references. When equipment at the repair shop malfunctioned in ways that seemed to coincidentally make my work more difficult, I wondered if I was becoming paranoid or if Carl was actually sabotaging me at the Thompson family's request. My salvation came from an unexpected source when Jessica Chen walked into Fixtech Electronics looking for someone to repair her laptop before an important investor presentation. Jessica was 26, impeccably dressed, and possessed the kind of confident energy that suggested significant success at a young age. When she noticed me struggling to complete a complex motherboard repair while Carl berated me for being too slow, she waited until he left for lunch before approaching me with genuine curiosity about my technical skills. Jessica's interest in my abilities led to several conversations about technology, entrepreneurship, and the challenges facing young people trying to break into competitive industries. She seemed genuinely impressed by my knowledge and insights, especially regarding accessibility technology and the untapped market potential in serving disabled consumers. When she offered to invest in a new startup based on my ideas, I felt like I was being offered a lifeline that could finally pull me out of the quicksand my life had become. The partnership seemed perfect until the night before we were scheduled to sign our formal agreement, when Jessica called to inform me that she had received information about my background that made the investment too risky to pursue. Her voice carried genuine regret as she explained that accusations of intellectual property theft and mental instability made me an unsuitable business partner, despite her personal belief in my abilities and character. That evening, as I sat in my car outside the apartment building I could no longer afford, I realized that my family had not simply rejected me. They had created a prison of reputation and influence that would follow me wherever I went. The sister they had dismissed as worthless was actually dangerous enough to require active suppression, a realization that sparked the first genuine hope I had felt in years. The Pacific Northwest winter had been particularly brutal, and by February of my 23rd year, I was living in my car more often than in any apartment I could afford. The combination of legal debt, blacklisted employment prospects, and my family's ongoing sabotage had reduced me to a daily struggle for basic survival. I was losing weight rapidly due to irregular meals, my health was deteriorating from stress and exposure to cold, and I had begun experiencing panic attacks that left me gasping for breath in parking lots where I tried to sleep undetected. The morning that changed everything started like many others, with me sitting in my car outside a 24-hour diner where the management allowed customers to use Wi-Fi as long as they occasionally bought coffee. I was working on coding projects that I uploaded to freelance platforms under false names, hoping to earn enough money for another night in a cheap motel. My laptop battery was dying, my phone service had been disconnected for non-payment, and I was seriously considering whether continuing this existence was worth the constant struggle and humiliation. Harrison Blake appeared beside my car like an apparition from a completely different world. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his early 40s, wearing a perfectly tailored coat that suggested significant wealth but without the ostentatious display that characterized my family's approach to status. His knock on my window was gentle but insistent, and when I reluctantly rolled it down, his first words were not what I expected from someone who looked like he belonged in boardrooms rather than diner parking lots. "I recognize the look of someone who's been beaten down by people who should have protected them," Harrison said with a directness that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "I also recognize exceptional talent when I see it, and what you just coded in the last hour is more innovative than anything my company's entire development team produced last month." He had been watching me work through the diner window, he explained, and my problem-solving approach and coding efficiency had impressed him enough to warrant an introduction. Harrison Blake was the CEO and founder of Apex Innovations, a mid-sized tech company that specialized in developing software solutions for Fortune 500 corporations. His personal story emerged over coffee and breakfast, the first real meal I had eaten in days. 20 years earlier, he had been disowned by his wealthy family for refusing to join the family banking business, choosing instead to pursue his passion for technology and social justice. His parents had used their influence to sabotage his early career attempts, forcing him to rebuild his life from nothing while facing the same kind of systematic rejection I was experiencing. The parallel between our experiences created an immediate bond that transcended the obvious differences in our current circumstances. Harrison understood the particular cruelty of family rejection, the way it poisoned every relationship and opportunity with doubt and suspicion. He had survived by developing the resilience to outlast his family's attempts at destruction, ultimately building a company successful enough to make their approval irrelevant. When he offered to invest in a new venture based on my accessibility technology concepts, he made it clear that his decision was based on my demonstrated abilities rather than sympathy for my situation. The partnership that developed over the following months became the closest thing to a father-daughter relationship I had ever experienced. Harrison treated me as an equal partner despite his vastly superior resources and experience, encouraging me to develop my ideas fully while providing the business expertise and financial backing necessary to compete in a sophisticated marketplace. For the first time since Samuel's friendship, I felt like someone believed in my potential rather than focusing on my limitations or troubled background. Our work developing next-generation accessibility software attracted attention from potential clients and investors, but it also triggered a swift response from my family's network of influence. Within weeks of our company's incorporation, Harrison began receiving calls from business associates warning him about his partnership with someone who had been described as unstable and legally problematic. Robert Thompson's law firm initiated preliminary legal research into intellectual property claims that could potentially target our new venture. The pressure campaign against Harrison escalated when Brandon appeared at Apex Innovations' corporate headquarters, accompanied by our former family doctor who was prepared to testify about my alleged mental health issues. The meeting, which Harrison later described to me in detail, was designed to convince him that I was not just a risky business partner but potentially dangerous to his company's reputation and employee safety. Brandon presented a carefully constructed narrative that portrayed him as a concerned brother trying to protect both me and Harrison from the consequences of my deteriorating psychological condition. The most devastating attack came when Margaret Thompson used her position and connections within the medical community to spread rumors about my supposed history of psychiatric hospitalization and medication noncompliance. The false information was sophisticated enough to sound credible to people who did not know me personally, creating doubt among potential clients and investors about our company's leadership stability. The campaign was designed to isolate Harrison professionally while making me appear too damaged to function in a business environment. During the darkest period of this psychological warfare, when it seemed like my family's influence would once again destroy everything I had worked to build, I seriously considered ending my life rather than continuing to bring destruction to people who tried to help me. The weight of causing problems for Harrison, who had shown me nothing but kindness and respect, felt unbearable. I wrote several suicide notes on my laptop, planning to spare him further association with my toxic family situation by removing myself from the equation permanently. Harrison discovered my despair during one of our late-night strategy sessions when he found the unsaved documents on my computer screen. Instead of the pity or fear I expected, his reaction was anger directed entirely at the people who had driven me to such a desperate state. That night, he called Samuel, whose phone number I had given him as an emergency contact, and together they staged an intervention that probably saved my life while also cementing the unusual family bond that would sustain me through the challenges ahead. Samuel's return to my life brought a stability and perspective that I had desperately needed. Despite his own ongoing struggles with unemployment and health issues related to the stress my family had caused him, he immediately committed himself to supporting our business venture and providing the emotional foundation I needed to continue fighting. The three of us formed an unconventional family unit bound together by shared experience with rejection and a determination to prove that success could triumph over systematic sabotage. By my 25th birthday, Access Tech had evolved from a desperate startup into a legitimate competitor in the assistive technology market. Our flagship product, a comprehensive mobile platform that integrated navigation assistance, communication tools, and emergency services for people with various disabilities, had attracted attention from major healthcare networks and government agencies interested in improving accessibility compliance. Harrison's business expertise combined with my technical innovation and Samuel's practical insights from his years in various industries created a synergy that elevated our work beyond anything I could have achieved alone. The success brought new challenges, particularly as media attention began focusing on our company's unusual origin story and rapid growth. Technology journalists were fascinated by the narrative of a young woman overcoming family rejection and legal troubles to build a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but their interest also attracted unwanted scrutiny from people who preferred that my past remain buried. The increased visibility made it impossible for my family to continue their sabotage campaign through anonymous channels, forcing them to adopt more direct and legally dangerous tactics. Brandon's attempt to claim credit for Access Tech's innovations represented a new level of desperation and delusion. He appeared at technology conferences and investor meetings, presenting himself as the original visionary behind our company's core concepts while portraying me as a junior developer who had misappropriated his ideas. His claims were supported by falsified documentation that his Harvard connections helped create, including fake timestamps on code repositories and fabricated email exchanges that appeared to show collaborative development work. The legal battle that ensued was far more sophisticated than Brandon's previous theft of my mobility app, involving patent attorneys, intellectual property experts, and forensic computer analysts who examined every line of code to determine its true origins. Robert Thompson leveraged his legal network to file simultaneous lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions, hoping to overwhelm our resources and force a settlement that would give Brandon partial ownership of Access Tech while establishing legal precedent for his claims of co-invention. The most insidious aspect of their strategy involved exploiting their supposed concern for my welfare to justify their attempted takeover. Robert argued in court filings that his daughter's history of mental instability and poor judgment made her unsuitable to control a company that served vulnerable populations. He requested court-appointed oversight of Access Tech's operations, ostensibly to protect our clients from potential harm caused by my alleged psychological problems, but actually to gain control over the company's direction and profits. Diana Walsh's reappearance in my life during this crucial period initially seemed like an opportunity for redemption and possibly alliance against my family's continued attacks. She contacted me through Harrison's assistant, claiming to have developed regrets about her previous betrayal and offering to provide inside information about my parents' legal strategy. Her apparent remorse seemed genuine, and she possessed detailed knowledge about my family's financial resources and business connections that could prove valuable in mounting our defense. My decision to reject Diana's overtures and refuse any cooperation with her proved wise when she immediately shifted tactics and began selling her story to technology blogs and business publications. Her version of events portrayed me as an unstable and vindictive person who had manipulated both her friendship and Harrison's business relationship through deception and emotional manipulation. The articles she helped generate were crafted to raise questions about my character and judgment without making legally actionable claims, creating doubt among potential clients and investors about Access Tech's leadership. The media campaign orchestrated through Diana's cooperation reached its peak when she appeared on a popular business podcast to discuss the dangers of partnering with entrepreneurs who had not been properly vetted. Without naming me directly, she described working with someone who exhibited signs of paranoia, vindictiveness, and an inability to maintain healthy professional relationships. The interview was scheduled to coincide with Access Tech's first major government contract negotiation, maximizing its potential to damage our business prospects. Harrison's response to these attacks demonstrated why our partnership had been so successful and why my trust in him was completely justified. Rather than distancing himself from me to protect his own reputation, he used his industry connections and media relationships to tell our story accurately and completely. His willingness to risk his own standing by publicly supporting me sent a clear message to our clients and investors that Access Tech's leadership team was united and confident in our mission. The breakthrough that transformed our regional success into national recognition came when the Department of Veterans Affairs selected Access Tech as the primary contractor for a $20 million initiative to improve accessibility services for disabled veterans. The contract validation represented not just financial security but governmental endorsement of our technology and business practices, making it much more difficult for my family to continue their campaign of professional sabotage. Samuel's pride in our achievement was particularly meaningful because he had lived to see his faith in my potential vindicated in such a spectacular way. His health had been declining due to diabetes and heart problems that were probably exacerbated by years of stress and financial hardship, but he insisted on attending the contract signing ceremony in Washington, D.C. Watching him beam with pride as government officials praised the innovation and social impact of our work felt like a completion of the journey we had begun together in that warehouse office years earlier. The success also brought a marriage proposal from Harrison that surprised me with its perfect timing and thoughtful presentation. Rather than a traditional romantic gesture, he framed his proposal as a business partnership expansion that acknowledged the personal relationship that had developed alongside our professional collaboration. His understanding that my past family experiences made traditional expressions of commitment complicated showed the same sensitivity that had characterized our entire relationship. As Access Tech's valuation approached $100 million and my personal net worth exceeded what most people earn in a lifetime, I began planning for a confrontation that had been inevitable since the night I was thrown out of my family home. The difference now was that I possessed the resources and confidence necessary to face my family from a position of strength rather than desperate vulnerability. The revelation that would change everything about my understanding of my own story came through a private investigator Harrison hired to document my family's harassment campaign for potential legal action. Marcus Webb was a former FBI agent whose specialty was uncovering financial fraud and corporate corruption, but his investigation into the Thompson family's business practices revealed medical records that had been deliberately concealed for over 2 decades. The information he discovered was so shocking that Harrison insisted on delivering it to me in person, with Samuel present for emotional support. According to the medical documents Marcus had obtained through legal channels, my supposed birth defect had not been a random developmental abnormality but the result of a medication error during my mother's pregnancy. Dr. Margaret Thompson had been prescribed a drug that was later found to cause limb deformities in developing fetuses, but she had continued taking it despite early warnings because acknowledging the connection would have damaged her professional reputation and exposed her to malpractice liability. Even more devastating was the discovery that corrective surgery performed when I was 12 years old had been completely successful in repairing the structural problems with my foot. My ongoing limp was actually the result of deliberate surgical sabotage during what I had been told was routine follow-up care. Margaret had convinced the original orthopedic surgeon to perform additional procedures that created permanent muscle and nerve damage, ensuring that my disability would remain visible and serve as ongoing evidence of her supposed victimhood in dealing with a defective child. The psychological impact of learning that my own mother had deliberately maintained my disability for her personal convenience was almost unbearable. Every moment of pain, every instance of discrimination, every limitation I had accepted as part of my identity had been artificially imposed by someone who was supposed to protect me. Margaret's medical expertise had allowed her to create a believable narrative about my condition while ensuring that I would never discover the truth about her responsibility for my suffering. Brandon's financial desperation during this period made him more dangerous than ever before. His attempts to profit from his association with my success had failed spectacularly, leaving him with massive debt from failed investments and a lifestyle he could no longer afford. His appearances at my apartment building became more frequent and erratic, often involving public confrontations that seemed designed to provoke me into reactions that could be used against me in their ongoing legal battles. The depths of Brandon's financial crisis became clear when he approached several tabloid publications with offers to sell private family information and photographs that would embarrass me personally while undermining Access Tech's reputation. His willingness to betray family privacy for money demonstrated how completely his privileged upbringing had failed to instill any genuine character or integrity, leaving him with only the belief that his problems were everyone else's responsibility to solve. Robert Thompson's legal troubles emerged from Marcus's investigation into the family's business practices and financial history. The systematic corruption that had funded their affluent lifestyle included kickbacks from corporate clients, manipulation of legal settlements, and abuse of his position as executor of various estate proceedings. The evidence was sufficient to support criminal charges that would likely result in disbarment and imprisonment, making him desperate for any negotiating leverage that might reduce his exposure. The family's sudden interest in reconciliation became transparent once they realized the full extent of what I had discovered about their crimes and manipulations. Their attempts at apology were carefully crafted by legal advisors who understood that admission of wrongdoing could be used against them in criminal proceedings, resulting in hollow statements that acknowledged my success while avoiding any responsibility for their role in nearly destroying my life. Margaret's approach was particularly manipulative because it exploited my supposed emotional vulnerability while offering medical explanations for past events that were designed to confuse rather than illuminate the truth. She claimed that postpartum depression had affected her judgment during my early years, and that her subsequent behavior had been influenced by guilt and professional pressure rather than deliberate cruelty. Her willingness to lie about mental health issues while working as a physician showed the same lack of ethics that had characterized her treatment of me throughout my childhood. Samuel's death during this period of revelation and confrontation was probably hastened by the stress of learning how extensively my family had manipulated and damaged my life. His final weeks were spent helping me process the anger and grief that came with understanding the true scope of their betrayal, while encouraging me to use my newfound knowledge constructively rather than allowing it to consume me with bitterness and desire for revenge. The funeral service for Samuel was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched during his various careers and volunteer activities, providing me with perspective on the kind of legacy that really mattered. Harrison's eulogy emphasized Samuel's role in building our business success, but more importantly celebrated his capacity for kindness and mentorship that had transformed multiple lives including my own. Harrison's marriage proposal during the weeks following Samuel's death represented not just personal commitment but recognition that we had built something together that transcended business partnership. His understanding that I needed time to grieve and process the revelations about my family showed the same patience and respect that had characterized our relationship from its beginning. The decision to confront my family directly rather than pursuing criminal charges or civil litigation was influenced by Samuel's final advice about the importance of closure and moving forward rather than remaining trapped by past trauma. His wisdom about forgiveness being a gift to the forgiver rather than the forgiven helped me understand that facing my family was necessary for my own healing, regardless of their response or whether they deserved my mercy. Standing on the front steps of my childhood home at 28 years old, I felt like I was inhabiting a completely different body than the broken 16-year-old girl who had been cast out into the rain 12 years earlier. The success of Access Tech had given me financial security that exceeded my family's wealth, but more importantly, it had proven that my worth was not determined by their acceptance or approval. The $1 million check in my hand was not a gesture of charity but a demonstration of the power they had tried so hard to prevent me from achieving. Brandon's face when he opened the door was a masterpiece of shock, fear, and desperate calculation as he tried to process the reality of his sister's transformation. Gone was the confident cruelty that had defined his treatment of me throughout our shared childhood, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone whose privileged life had finally collapsed under the weight of its own emptiness. The expensive clothes could not hide his obvious financial stress, just as his forced smile could not mask his terror at what my return might mean for his future. The interior of the house that had once seemed so grand and intimidating now appeared smaller and more ordinary, like a museum display of a lifestyle that had lost its power to impress or intimidate me. Margaret and Robert emerged from the living room where they had obviously been coaching each other on how to handle this confrontation, their carefully practiced expressions of surprise and pleasure failing to hide the calculation behind their eyes as they assessed the threat and opportunity my presence represented. Margaret's attempt at maternal warmth was perhaps the most disgusting aspect of their performance, as she tried to embrace me while commenting on how successful and healthy I appeared. Her medical training allowed her to notice immediately that my limp was far less pronounced than it had been during my childhood, but her compliments about my improved mobility were delivered without any acknowledgement of her role in maintaining my disability far longer than necessary. Robert's approach was more direct and business-focused, as he attempted to frame the conversation around family reconciliation and shared success rather than past grievances that he clearly hoped I would be willing to forget. His legal instincts told him that apologies could be used as admissions of guilt, so he focused instead on expressing pride in my achievements while suggesting that our family reunion was overdue and beneficial for everyone involved. The conversation that followed was a careful dance around the truths we all knew but that they were desperate to avoid acknowledging explicitly. Their offer to welcome me back into the family came with carefully crafted conditions designed to limit my ability to expose their past behavior while giving them access to the social and financial benefits of association with my success. They wanted the respectability of having raised a successful daughter without accepting any responsibility for nearly destroying my life in the process. Brandon's contribution to the discussion revealed the depths of his delusion and entitlement as he actually suggested that our family conflicts had been beneficial because they had motivated me to achieve success I might not have attained otherwise. His attempt to take credit for my accomplishments by claiming that his childhood cruelty had been a form of tough love showed that years of privilege and failure had not taught him anything about personal responsibility or genuine remorse. My response to their reconciliation offer was delivered with the same calm professionalism I used in business negotiations, laying out terms that would govern any future relationship between us. The $1 million check represented a donation to disability rights organizations that would be made in the Thompson family name, ensuring that their association with charitable work benefited the communities they had taught me to despise through their treatment of my condition. The choice I offered them was simple but non-negotiable. They could accept the donation and agree to have no further contact with me or anyone in my life, allowing both sides to move forward separately, or they could attempt to maintain a family relationship that would require public acknowledgement of their past behavior and formal apologies that admitted specific wrongdoing. Their decision would reveal whether their interest in reconciliation was genuine or simply another attempt to exploit our connection for their benefit. Their choice was as predictable as it was revealing. Robert's immediate focus on the financial implications of the donation rather than the human costs of continued estrangement showed that his priorities had not changed since my childhood. Margaret's concern about how public apologies might affect her medical practice demonstrated that her professional reputation remained more important than any relationship with the daughter she had systematically abused. Brandon's angry demand that I share my wealth with the family that had invested in my upbringing revealed his complete inability to understand that his inheritance had been the love and support I had never received. His belief that biological connection entitled him to profit from my success without contributing anything positive to my life showed that privilege had taught him to expect rewards without effort or merit. The final goodbye I shared with the house and family that had shaped so much of my early trauma felt like closing a book that had defined my life for too long. Walking away with Harrison at my side and the knowledge that Samuel's memory would be honored through the scholarship program we established in his name, I realized that my real family had nothing to do with blood relationships or shared genetics. The drive back to our home felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with that 16-year-old girl carrying everything she owned in a backpack, wondering if she would survive the cruelty of the people who should have protected her. The love and partnership I had found with Harrison, the mentorship and wisdom Samuel had shared, and the community of employees and clients who benefited from Access Tech's work had created a family bound together by choice rather than obligation. Some families are born, others are chosen, and the ones we choose often love us better than the ones we inherit. I chose mine, and they chose me back, creating something more valuable than all the money in my bank accounts or recognition in my trophy case. That, more than any business success or financial achievement, was the real victory over the family that thought they could decide my worth. What would you do if your family rejected you but you later became more successful than they ever imagined? How do you think success changes the way people treat you, and is that fair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And do not forget to hit that like button if this story inspired you to believe that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building the life you deserve, and please share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dreams are valid regardless of who supports them. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to choose people who choose you back. Until next time, keep believing in your own strength and the family you create along the way.